Minister of State for Housing and Planning, proposing motion number 142.
Delegates, I formally move motion 142 on behalf of the Central Council. Comrades, the Mahon Tribunal report is the end of a cycle. Granted, it was an expensive, lengthy cycle, but now the cumulative effects of the McCracken, Flood, Moriarty and Mahon reports lay bare the rank corruption, hypocrisy and greed that existed at the very top of Irish politics and in the Fianna Fáil party in particular. Many of you here in this hall will have seen the video clip of Frank Cluskey from our conference in 1984, and if you haven't seen it, it's shown in the room next door in the Centenary exhibition. Frank was lambasting the scandal of thousands of pounds in illicit donations finding their way into the coffers of other political parties and the personal accounts of certain politicians. Frank made that speech 28 years ago. Nearly 3 decades ago, Labour had the courage to point out this scandal. And as Brendan Howland said earlier on this morning, we have proudly maintained our opposition to the backhanders, bribes and jobbery that others accepted as part and parcel of political life. When he was just 1 year in Dáil Éireann, our party leader Eamon Gilmore called for an inquiry into planning corruption in Dublin. His parliamentary question went first to P. Flynn, the Minister for the Environment, who passed it on to Ray Burke, the Minister for Justice, both of whom reported to Charles Haughey, the Taoiseach. You will understand, delegates, that there was no inquiry forthcoming. Burke and Flynn's actions have been found to be corrupt by the Flood and Mahon tribunals, and Haughey's behaviour, as to put it rather mildly, as Justice Moriarty said, devalued the quality of a modern democracy. We now know that just 1 year before Eamon Gilmore raised the necessity for an inquiry into planning corruption, these 3 individuals received more than £200,000 in corrupt, illicit or surreptitious payments. The party leader's allowance was rifled, the Lenihan Medical Fund was tapped, business friends were squeezed and potential investors in Ireland were bullied and cajoled. The tribunals, of course, found wrongdoings in the ranks of parties other than Fianna Fáil. And I agree wholeheartedly with my colleague Minister Pat Rabbitte when he expresses his frustration at the delay in bringing proceedings against those identified in the tribunal reports. And also, delegates, in the banking sector, whose actions have inflicted so much damage on our country. As Minister for Planning, I am fully committed to taking on board the recommendations of the Mahon Tribunal and reforming our planning system so that it serves families and communities, not cliques and vested interests. Planning is at the heart of good neighbourhoods, cohesive communities and sustainable development. All those important social goals were thrown aside in the orgy of corruption and backhanders that dictated many rezoning and planning decisions in County Dublin in the late 1980s and early 1990s. And I am determined, delegates, and I know this party is determined, that this will never happen again. Corruption is not a victimless crime. To this day, my colleagues, including Ministers Joan Burton and Pat Rabbitte, Deputies Robert Dowds, Eamon Maloney and Joanna Tuffy, can attest to the damage and disadvantage that corrupt decisions have foisted on communities in West Dublin in particular. The cycle of tribunal reports has come to a conclusion. Despite the cost, despite the time involved, they have achieved much. They reveal the consequences for communities and for the nation when public interest is subsumed by private greed. And I am proud in the centenary year of the Labour Party to say that this party opposed corruption tooth and nail. The lazy generalisation that they were all at it is wrong and a slur on the principled public representatives who remained loyal to the calling of public service, and many of those principled representatives are here in this room today. It is important, delegates, it is important that this conference acknowledges the role of our public representatives in opposing corruption and graft and supporting proper planning and care for the environment. Labour has a proud record on planning, And as Minister for Planning, I am committed to ongoing reform of the planning system so that it is always a public good, never a private casino. And colleagues, I commend the motion. Thank you.
Joanna Tuffy TD, Dublin Midwest, seconding